Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
And thank you so much, Cambridge Tech Week, for having us. It's a complete honor to be here. From what I understand is your inaugural event, which I know is going to be fantastic for the city of Cambridge. And for those watching virtually, we're so excited to have you with us as well. As mentioned, my name is Whitney Richardson. I'm an aesthetic scientist with deep history in the visual arts community as well as the storytelling community. And I'm so honored to be here with a friend and a colleague, Suhair Khan, who's a creative strategist and a consultant, and also a founder and director of her own organization called Open-Ended Design, which is a platform and incubator for creative technologists working with artificial intelligence. Suhair has had a decade of experience at Google, leading technology companies, and her work has focused on the intersection of cutting-edge technologies, including machine learning and data, with arts, design, culture, education, and environmental sustainability. She's also the board member of many organizations in London, not just being fabulous, as she's also giving back. Studio Wayne McGregor Design Museum and the London Design Museum in the arts sector. So we're thrilled to have you here, Suhair, and we can jump into today's conversation. So can you just first start describing what your mission and vision is for Open-Ended? You started it in 2020, right around the pandemic when the world was all going online. Why did you decide to start your incubator thinking about machine learning at the heart of it?
Right. So thank you for having me here. It's a great honor at Cambridge. So I was at Google at the time that I started Open-Ended Design, and I actually felt in my work, I was leading arts and culture at Google, working with artists, curators, architects, and designers, and engaging them with technology, lots of work with machine learning, hybrid realities. But I felt that as and we're not-for-profit, really set up as an experimental entity within the organization with no advertising. And we were able to create incredible outcomes in merging science, technology, engineering, and art, culture, creativity. Some of it was published, a lot of it was experimental. And you can, of course, download the app if you want to see more. But I did feel that there was very few open ecosystems that were curating ideas, thinkers, interdisciplinary work outside of organizations like Google, which have the resources to support that work. So I actually set up Open-Ended Design as a way of actually encouraging younger, more diverse talent working across technology and creative disciplines, or at least with creativity as a driver of their work, to come and to participate in conversations and dialogues in the space, and to find a community which actually is growing and didn't yet fully exist outside of these bubbles. Everybody knows that technology companies, especially the big ones, have very high walls, not just because that's how data is held, but also communication is limited. It's hard to get on the inside. It's hard to get access to tools, to technologies. Of course, now it's easier to have access to data sets and APIs. And I felt that it was an opportunity for me to start to break down those walls. So that was why I started Open-Ended Design. It was with a strong lens on diversity. We were looking at neurodiversity, socioeconomic background, cultural diversity. But the one thing that everybody we brought together had in common was work as a creative coder, a creative technologist, or an artist or a creative person who worked with AI fundamentally as a core to their practice. And that was how it started. Fast forward to 2022, we're now actually building a fund and more of an actual incubator around that space. And I left Google a year ago.
Well, congratulations on all of that. And it's an incredible and important mission, especially through the lens of inclusion. You mentioned a few of them, but economic inclusion is also really important as well, right? When we think about access to data and to Wi-Fi, not everyone has it, even in this country, in America. How are you thinking about that when we're thinking about inclusion? The fact that you could have the best ideas and the most creative solutions, but if you don't have access to stable Wi-Fi, it's hard to enter the market anyway.
So thank you for asking that question. I mean, for whoever was in the last panel, it was really sort of structured around how technologies and algorithms can be biased. But actually, apart from that, I think access to the internet is very biased. And of course, we've had massive progress in access to technological tools, to Wi-Fi, to connectivity around the world. And now we have ecosystems like ChatGPT, which I'm also excited by. You know, they expand the ability for any one of us to learn, to engage, and to build in an online space and using digital technologies. But the truth of it is that we still have a fundamental disconnect. On the one hand, you have what we call digital poverty. We have it definitely in this country. A few years ago, in 2021, I was a member of the jury for the Museum of the Year prize in the UK, and it was fascinating. We traveled around the UK, we visited museums to understand, you know, their work. It was a time of COVID. We ended up giving the prize to a small cultural institution in Essex. And the biggest thing that we realized in traveling around the country during a pandemic, as culture was coming to people via digital platforms, was that a lot of people didn't have access to the internet, or they had one laptop at home and they had 3 kids who had to attend school. So how are they then meant to engage with culture, with creativity, with learning, with expanding their critical thinking outside of their home when they actually weren't able to step outside? So that's a conversation that I think is really important to continue to have here. People are creative, we know that. You know, kids can get on that iPad, they can find a Wi-Fi connection, you figure stuff out. But that is a limitation, and the bigger limitation, I think, becomes about confidence, about critical thinking, about freedom to engage when you know there's a disconnect between you and access to a device or understanding of a technology or a tool. And I think that's where, in this era where we all have access to building our own algorithms via ChatGPT, if we're not speaking the language of that code, we're not going to be as empowered as somebody who does, on the one hand. And the second thing is, if we're not learning and being educated to be empowered with critical thinking, with the ability to ask our own questions, to see things, to imagine and to create, then those tools are not going to be as significant and as meaningful to us in the future. And I think we have to address that.
Absolutely. I've heard you once say that you are also questioning what it means, what intelligence means today, with AI at our fingertips, but also what does it mean to be a creative? How are you thinking about creative intelligence in today's age of accessing these tools for those of us who can and have access to it?
Right, so I mean, it's amazing to be at Cambridge and to talk about intelligence, to be honest, right? Especially within sort of this kind of gathering. You know, on the one hand, you know, we need to continue. We need to, you know, tech companies are research institutions in many ways. We need to continue to build on tools which are framed around cognitive intelligence, because that's, for me, how artificial intelligence has been defined up till this point. But I think we also need to separate the word artificial from intelligence. At the end of the day, intelligence goes beyond the purely cognitive. And most algorithms and most machine learning platforms are built off of intelligence, which is of the mind. And you know, that applies across the board, whether it's medicine, environment, of course, search data, whatever it is that we're looking at. I think we need to start to reframe it. When we think about creativity, what is intelligence? Plants are intelligent. Ecology has an intelligence. We have intuition, there's spirituality, consciousness, dreaming. You know, you could go on. And I think this is a moment, I mean, we're at an amazing inflection point in artificial intelligence, where there is going to be now a gold rush to a lot of applications of technologies in this space. But actually, there is a moment of also slowing down and reconsidering, what does it mean to define intelligence, and how do we want this to be channeled into data sets, into algorithms, and who are the people and the individuals that we want to engage and leverage on this journey to help us to create a new world. And I think it's a very hopeful moment, but it is a time for a redefinition for all of us here also to consider, what is intelligence to each of us, not just for our children, but for us as we connect, as we communicate. I was at a conference in Ibiza in Spain last week, and I'm not sure what it was about, but there was a lot of workshops on sexual wellness, desire, health, well-being, the body. I mean, what is sexual desire but the most physical experience you could have? And as you consider how we're framing, you know, when you think about like sex on the internet, it's violent, it's, you know, there's a lot of pornography, there's a lot of language around safety, privacy. But as we start to reframe, what does it mean to experience this world? How can we use technologies, build algorithms that actually lean into the beauty of human experience, of feeling and of emotion? And I do think it's very possible. And so therefore, what I think is that it's important to leverage interdisciplinary thinking And I really believe that artists, creatives, and even engineers and coders who feel empowered to build new worlds should be doing it. And they are the makers of our time, frankly. I think software engineers in this moment are the craftspeople of this era, and we really need to celebrate that.
Absolutely. I see them as the chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So right now, there is a gap between software engineers and artists, right? And I think both at the moment look at each other on the other end of the platform saying they have these skills that I don't have, and it's almost slightly intimidating for them to collaborate. How are you using open-ended to bridge that gap, and how are you thinking about in the world of creative intelligence, if we need artists to help us rethink the data sets that we're training algorithms on, how are we doing that with what you founded?
Right, so I think it comes a little bit back to neurodiversity. So I can talk a little bit about my inspirations. You mentioned Wayne McGregor. So I'm on the board of Studio Wayne McGregor, and Wayne is the choreographer for the Royal Ballet. I don't know if anyone has seen his work in the past, but it's modern dance, it's interpretive, there's ballet, and he works with people from, his sets are designed by artists, architects, he works with coders, neuroscientists, and he's really interested in physical intelligence and how the body carries its own intelligence. And I did a collaboration with him while I was still in my previous job, where we built a tool so that he could choreograph new performances entirely using machine learning based on the repository of his own career. And then we further started to add on layers so that the tool would allow each dancer in the piece to move and to have their movement recorded, and for then the tool to be changing movements and the course of the dance around how their bodies moved and worked. And I think this is also a really important distinction for everybody in the audience here. There's machine learning and there's of course artificial intelligence, and then we get to AGI, however intelligence begins to be framed in sort of more overwhelming ways. But I think working with Wayne, we realized that because he sees, as I said, outside of the cognitive, he's thinking about the body, about movement, about you and I interacting, about music, about feeling, about temperature, in ways that none of our engineers or coders would have done. We were able to come up with an outcome that was led by him, by his vision, by his needs, and where the technologies were serving him. And for me, that is an outcome which is not easy. It takes time. In this case, of course, it takes resources, which large companies are able to basically invest and assign. But I think this is a challenge for all of us now, is how do we get that kind of funding to creating slower, probably more painful collaborations that are pushing us towards outcomes that a machine is not going to naturally come to, and that secondly are fulfilling a deeper experience of how we push ourselves into the universe and hopefully achieve things that are less possible. And that's what we're continuing with open-ended. So we have a summit this September on the futures of intelligence. Everybody's very welcome to attend, where we're going to be looking at each of these themes and inviting people across disciplines to have conversations and to really frame them around critical thinking. Whitney, you've been part of these conversations. How do we consider placemaking in a metaverse or whatever virtual spaces we're building? How do we consider decolonization, decarbonization, and how are we channeling ideas from a diverse spectrum, which includes creative people, into how hopefully technologies are built and deployed?
Let's fast forward 5 years from now. What does the creative economy look like? How are people funding their projects in this perfect world that we're creating through open-ended?
Well, I'm embarrassed because everybody knows in 5 months, everything is going to change, right? When you think about these platforms. But so I think we do see a moment of decentralization. Right now we're talking about it. We're talking about a decentralized internet. We're also talking about societies shifting. We're obviously at this geopolitical flux with what does democracy mean? What does capitalism mean? How do we resist the pressure, even with AI, to build for profit and for margin? But I see a moment where we have a lot of more of a symbiotic relationship between what does it mean to be a creative, let's say a philosopher and a technologist, and most importantly, we have demographics around the world changing. So as more and more people get access to the internet, but also access to be empowered to leverage tools that allow them to build, I see actually a really positive space where if we can invest in education in whatever way that expands critical thinking, which will be linked to innovation. I don't think we're going to have innovation without critical thinking in the future. We're going to have the ability to build new cities that are based around the needs and the use cases of their particular environments and their populations. We know that Africa is going to be the most populated continent in the world, in a short period of time. India has just surpassed China. Things are moving very rapidly, and the median age, the demographics of these countries are completely different from what we've experienced so far. And I think as people are able to leverage these technologies, we're going to be hopefully able to be building for a better world. I think the risk, of course, is that we're not discussing what our values are. What do we believe in and what are we building for? And I don't think it's pie in the sky. Like, we're sitting here with people really assigning to themselves values of excellence, values of achievement. We're talking about health, wellness, innovation. But we also just had a panel on identity. And there's an artist, Ez Devlin, who you know. She's an incredible designer. She's an artist. She talks about naming algorithms. She works a lot with artificial intelligence and machine learning in her work, and she says she names the algorithm. It is not neutral. It's been built and designed and fed information and data by any number of individuals, most of all from particular parts of the world. So she feels more comfortable in separating herself from it and then considering what she wants to get out of it and out of a collaboration. And I think if we're able to translate that kind of thinking down to outcomes in this space, we'll have wonderful innovations, and that's already happening.
I'm hopeful about this future of 5 years. I'm going to open the floor to questions. I want everyone to have an opportunity. Oh, okay. One right here. Thank you so much, Suhair. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm learning so much.
Hello, it's Marianne Claridge from Mandrel Systems. I'd like to challenge what sounds like an underlying assumption of yours, the separation between creatives and technologies. You had me right up until you talked about that, but I think the technologists are completely creative. You allow your creatives to use AI and technology tools, but I don't think you're allowing for how much the technologists use creativity, both in the code they're producing and interpreting results. As a data scientist, I have to get my output recognizable, comprehensible, and I know if I draw a database schema and it looks wrong, it is wrong.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so I think, you know what? So, it's something that I haven't said, but I actually think that you have two different languages. Technologists imagine and build new worlds. And for me, I've worked with engineers my whole career. It's not about being an artist or a creative and not being creative. I think we're at a moment of empowering technologists to do so. And I think tools like, let's say ChatGPT is a tool, allows like a lot of the functional work to get out of the way. But it's like getting an essay in Spanish if you don't speak Spanish. Unless you're an engineer or a coder, you can't take it, interpret it, or build on it. So I actually completely agree with you. And I think this is a moment of considering what does it mean to have imagination. But it isn't about just coding. It's about any profession. To have the power within yourself, it's your education, it's your experience in your career that's allowed you to be confident in saying, I can imagine and I can build. And I totally agree. You imagine and build new worlds. And what is it that you actually work on? I'm curious about.
I'm a data scientist.
And it focused across
Anything.
anything? Yeah, and you're visualizing. So I've worked, especially with Google Arts and Culture, I worked with creative coders. They self-defined as creative coders. They chose to do it. And I totally agree. It's not to say that coding is more or less creative. But what I want to do and what we have been working on is creating shared spaces, because you often need bridges across disciplines. And I can give you one more example because I think you'll enjoy it. I did a collaboration with the Belvedere Museum in Vienna a few years ago. We were doing a global retrospective on Gustav Klimt. Does everybody know Klimt, the artist? Okay, so we did it because he was one of the most searched for artists in the world, and we were like, people will click on this. But as we were doing the research, we realized that there was a fire during World War II where maybe 10 or 15 of his artworks were destroyed because the Nazis had set fire to somebody's house. And so Damien Henry, who you should Google, he was the head of our lab at the time. He is a creative technologist, he's a coder, he's an AI scientist, and he now works at Stability. He was like, I want to recolor these paintings. I want to figure out a way of bringing color back to these paintings because we only had black and white images of them. It was his idea. But the truth is, if we had just taken machine learning and looked at all of Klimt's paintings and recolored them, we wouldn't have come to an accurate outcome. We had to work painstakingly with the head curator of the Belvedere Museum, whose name was Franz Smola, who was really lovely. And the museum hated it. But we had to go through this really long process with him sitting with Damia. It wasn't just about applying machine learning for that era or that period or that style of work. It was going through research, through archives, through his own intuitive process to eventually come to an outcome that brought them both together. So I think actually this is a moment where we need more collaboration in these spaces, but not to say that engineers are not imagining new worlds. I totally agree with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question.
You spoke a little bit about empowering through education. Going back to your 5-year vision, what are the provisions in open-ended design that allow digital leapfrogging?
I think that's really, so, and there's also like, you know, at what age, right? What are you talking about? What demographic, what age? I think, you know, on the one hand, I talked about demographics. I think we want young people to feel empowered. We're working right now with a loosely defined group of people who's pretty much at an emerging inflection point. Originally, the people we chose to include and to incubate were people who had not yet made it, who were people that we felt needed more platforms. You know, we had our own criteria and we wanted to push them out and to get them to have more space. What we've realized now is that people who are looking for funding, for platform and collaboration, are generally a little bit younger, have less access, and are not within large organizations. They don't have the infrastructure, either technical or research or resource-driven, of a large technology company, and that's why they're coming to us. And secondly, even though they might have access to platforms like Stability or, you know, any kind of like, let's say, ecosystem that would allow them to pay to have access to data, APIs, whatever, they need support, they need guidance, and they need mentorship. So for us, what we're doing feels like it's more organic. It's a way of asking, it's a call to action, come to us, but we're being very, very careful about making sure that it feels accessible to people who are not just here in these institutions, in these spaces. We're talking a lot about neurodiversity. We're going through organizations that particularly deal with bringing young people to the table who identify as neurodiverse. It's hard, of course, to go completely global, but we're trying to provide resources that we feel are required or needed by individuals who are seeking them. I also think that putting out inspirational stories, we have a series, we now have about 30 podcasts with people like Whitney, and pushing them into the universe about people who've not just had one job, who've not just been part of one career, and who've pushed themselves to work across technology and other spaces with a lens on impact. I think that's inspiring, and we've also felt that a community has developed alongside it as we've done it. And then finally, what I think we have the advantage of doing through our own careers and our contacts and our connections is to bring people, you know, to the fore to advise and to mentor and to support. And I found, I'm sure a lot of you find this, there's a lot of powerful, successful people, particularly in tech, who don't really know how to speak the language, how to engage, how to reach out to individuals who they might support. So we're creating a funnel. We're taking investment, we're taking money, and we're also taking their ability to provide scale to organizations, small companies, and creatives in the space. So it's an iterative process. We're learning as we go along, but we found that the people who are coming to us are actually younger, but it's not targeted at schools or any particular academic institution, yes. And I am looking at if we should make connections with universities and educational institutions, but our greatest concern is that is in itself, you know, mapping to, you know, I guess it's more of an elite narrative. You don't really need to have gone to school to learn how to use these platforms, and I think that's the beauty of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a quick question about Stability AI. There are so many open source modules on the website, and as Khalifa University or as for our startups, we tried to reach out when it came to beyond anything to do with art and graphics, but the other modules, and we couldn't reach anybody. And we don't know how to get into that open source community, and that created just a wall. So I'm glad you're here. I was trying to reach out to Imad Mushtaq, basically, but on many bases. So we're interested as from our end to discuss collaboration and even opportunity for the young startup community as well.
Is everybody familiar with Stability? Is that not everybody? Okay, I guess I don't like work with them or directly for them, but I think it's worth checking out because it is one of a series of platforms that's evolved from creating community within the space of basically software engineering and providing access both to organizations and to individuals, to data sets, to APIs, and it's building and growing over time. There's also Stable Diffusion, which is a, I guess, visual search-based AI platform, and they're also busily acquiring others. I think that's a really interesting point because the entire ethos is that it should be open. What we found is people are unsure of how to use it or where to go or what to do or where to begin. But the truth is, at the end of the day, I think you need still large organizations and platforms to build large language models and to train them. And that's still a blockage. And I think that's hopefully going to shift in the next few years. But it holds back innovation. And I don't know, where are you based? Okay, so there's another thing, right? It's like you're coming and you're trying to engage and to connect. And you know, when I was at Google in London, it's not funny, but sometimes in the King's Cross office, you'd have people saying, I've come to the office because I can't get into my Gmail account and I just need someone to help me. And you'd have like a befuddled receptionist being like, well, I can't help you. But that's not okay. That's people's lives. That's their bank accounts. It's their insurance statements. And in this case, I think there's still so far to go. And I think when you talk about the future being decentralized, there's a moment of considering how is it going to be possible? And Whitney, actually, you should tell us, like, are we going to come to a point where we can actually engage with technologies in a way where really everybody can build, or are we going to end up, the last session we talked about regulation, EU AI regulation, we're still in a world where very few large organizations and governments are going to map out our future, and their ethics, their values, their sense of right and wrong is going to continue to map out where we go with these technologies, and can that shift, and do you see that becoming something different?
Personally,
yeah.
I would say yes. I hope so. There was a time, if we think about an organization like the New York Times, where when it was print media, there was a room full of people who decided what was on the front page every single day, and it decided what the world saw as the most important news. But as the internet grew, and news and media moved to the internet, people then decided, and algorithms then decided what became front and center news. And I do think that that's going to continue to happen, and things will continue to be more decentralized, and you will have, as technology grows and as more people have access to it, more democracy around how that happens. So I'm hopeful, but no one really knows, actually. We can only look back in history to see what's happened before, to see what's going to happen in the future. But I'm hopeful.
Love that. But yeah, email me, or we'll chat later.
Hi there, I'm Julie Bradford from Real Wireless. I just had a question about funding for the kind of collaborations that you're talking about, because I think you kind of mentioned coming from a large organisation like Google, you're able to work on these kind of projects. But if you want to have projects where you've got collaborations between the arts and technology, I mean, I've got a few projects in mind, and funding is always the blocker, and the business case for these applications at the end. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how sources of funding and how to accelerate these kind of collaborations, you know, bearing in mind that the creative industries is absolutely huge in the UK and a real strength that we've got.
I think it's a really good question, and I think there's a gap between assuming that any project in this space needs to be framed as not for profit or for good or for helping make the world better according to somebody, and it's something that I've really struggled with, because you want to create ecosystems that can evolve and build and be investable, and that I think is shifting now. So we were talking about sexual wellness. 5 or 6 years ago, it was not an investable category from a VC perspective, and I think the same is true for creative tech. Brent Hoberman, who's a major investor, he runs Founders Forum in the UK, he wrote an article in the FT, an op-ed a couple of weeks ago on this, and I think we're at an inflection point where you're going to have a lot more investors who see, you know, whatever it's called, triple bottom line. You know, there are going to be longer term benefits on investing in these sorts of projects, technologies, and ideas. There is still institutional funding for it. There's going to be foundational support for it. But I actually really believe if you want to empower data scientists, creative people to feel like they can be part of the future of this economy and to stay at the cutting edge of it, you need funding that actually is considering what comes back, and also to provide the support to figure out business models, because it is going to be possible. especially because they're going to be differentiating points in a largely commoditized space if everybody is using the same tools and you're coming at it from a different angle or from a research perspective or a creative angle. So we can also chat later, but I do feel confident that this is a moment of a shift in that.
Well, we are at time. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you so much, Suhair, for all of the knowledge that you've imparted on all of us. I hope that you feel inspired. Please, I think she's going to stick around for the rest of the afternoon, so don't be shy. Find out more about the amazing work that her and her company are doing, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.